today's Scaling with People podcast. I'm going to be Curry, your host and founder of Guide to HR. Today, we're going to be talking about how to become a rock star with hiring. And I'm super excited to have Burton on the call with me. He is a recruiter extraordinaire, talent acquisition superstar. Jordan, thank you so much for joining me today. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks so much. I'm excited to be here and join you. It's interesting when I have the word recruiter ringing in my mind, and I'm like, work with so many amazing recruiters, and I want to learn from them the art of like the outreach. The thing that I'm really good at is the interviewing part of it, like figuring out who's good. So I love the partnership that comes from great talent sourcing with great talent assessment. And the part that I've spent a career building is the talent assessment part. Essentially, I'm a professional interviewer, and I got my start 17 years ago learning how to assess CEO and CFO and other C-level execs on behalf of private equity investors. Worked with a fabulous firm called GH Smart that is sort of the leader in that space. And then 10 years ago, struck off on my own, largely with the vision of teaching other people great hiring and great interviewing best practices, specifically founders and bootstrapped high growth companies that are trying to build extraordinary teams without gigantic budgets. So being, in the Silicon Valley area, there's a lot of that around. And we built a thriving business just on helping founders get it right.
Yeah, and that is such a crucial piece, especially your first couple hires. Sometimes they're like, family friends or people that you know. But then as you start to kind of get to that point where you're hiring unknown people, or maybe referral, and then you get to that point where you're starting to hire key roles and high level roles. Those first few hires, they're critical no matter where you are in your life cycle, but certainly in a startup, that could be literally a crash or burn situation.
For sure.
So let's kind of get some foundation built for anybody that isn't really familiar with recruiting. Let's talk about what the recruiting life cycle contains. Can you share a little bit about what that is?
Yeah, we think about it as essentially a 5-step process. There is role definition. You got to know what you're hiring for. And it sounds trivial, but this is a place where so many companies get it wrong from the get-go. So we have to have some sort of criteria, like there's a business need that's driving us to need our head of X, or if it's an individual contributor or anything in between, there's some role definition, a standard of success. Once we have that in place, we got to go source candidates. And we certainly have a perspective on what great looks like here and how the founders and the high growth companies that do it right, where they source talent. Where is the best talent? We certainly, through our assessment work, have learned that from talking about a lot of executives about their careers. But there's sourcing, then there's interviewing. So much to say there. So many bad ways of doing
it. We'll blow that up in a
minute
here, right?
Sure. I'm sure we'll get into that. And I would include referencing with that as well. Mm-hmm. Then you got to make a decision. So you've done all your interviews. You're going to make a decision. Do we hire this person or not? And then, of course, the final step, we got to bring the person on. And I would say, by the way, selling is another part of this. We need to sell people on the role, especially when we don't have a big recruiting brand that's going to attract people out the door. But that happens throughout the process. I wouldn't call that one step. That needs to be throughout. But that final step, I would say, is onboarding, making sure that we take the information that we've learned about this person and get them the strongest start possible, give them the resources they need to really hit the ground running.
Yeah, because you've done all that work. If you don't onboard them correctly for them to be successful and for them to be engaged and happy they made the decision to join you, you're going to lose them in 60 to 90 days or maybe 3 to 6 months. And you're doing it all over again.
What an expensive loss.
Time and money, right? And if you have a product launch or some kind of like launch date or due date you're trying to hit, you're coming up to your investor meeting or your board meeting, or you need to fundraise. And this is not the thing you want to be distracting you.
That's right.
Absolutely. So love that. Thank you so much for that high level definition of what that includes. So tell me, what do you see when people are coming to you? What do you see are some of the trends or common mistakes that hiring managers are making in today's landscape?
There are so many. It's about taking a very long list and sorting by frequency.
Yeah.
I think that probably the most common issues we see, if we take founders in particular, if we talk about individuals who are starting new organizations, I think what we see is, you kind of alluded to it before, we early on, because we have no resources around us, we need to kind of hire people who we know. And so we end up hiring friends, which there isn't really a problem with that. These are people who are more likely to take risks on your idea. They know you, they know your greatness, and they're going to be easier to persuade. So there's some sense to it. But I think one of the mistakes we see early on for companies is we end up building a monoculture because we end up just hiring people that we know and that we like without a clear role in mind. We just know they're good people. We're going to enjoy building something together. At some point that taps out. If this is about scaling with people, that doesn't scale well.
No, it does not.
You end up with a culture where that's a little bit closed off, like anyone who is outside of this inner circle, this club of your friends, feels like there's this thing that they can't access. That's an affinity network of people who know each other. We want to be seeking diversity from the get-go. We want to be hiring based upon skills, talents, expertise, knowledge, not based upon whether we like the person or not. So I think top of the list, I would put early on hiring based on who you know and who you like, as opposed to the real skills and fit for the role.
Yeah, that's just true. Because sometimes, I mean, I've fallen into it. I know every hiring manager falls into it. Sometimes the get the butt in the seat moment of pressure outweighs the better decision of holding off and finding the right skill with the right person. That's going to be a longer lasting relationship.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. So we said, okay, we're going to dive into that interviewing process.
Sure.
So I'd love to get your insight, because I have a couple different ways I've seen it done. And I think there's obviously no right or wrong, but what do you find is the best approach, or the best, in class approach to building your interview process and structure? What does that actually mean?
I think there's a few things, and I can kind of walk through some best practices here. One is we need to make sure that we are focused on building real human connection with our candidates, not just because of candidate experience. Of course, we want to have candidates who are enjoying their interactions with us, for sure. But frankly, that's how we get better information. So we want to build a connection with a human being, and that has to be built upon legitimate curiosity, fascination to hear their story. We call it be fascinated. If you come into every interaction with a candidate from this place of, I can't wait to learn about you, I'm excited to hear about you and your story, we've just avoided, I would say, probably, if we went just on a triage of the mistakes made in interviewing, bad rapport would be at or near the top. Beyond that, there's still lots of potential mistakes and way better ways to do it. We would just say that there's a certain dynamic that you want to create with the questions that you ask, where we don't want to be asking hypothetical questions of candidates. We don't want to ask, how would you handle this situation or that situation? A lot of candidates are going to give you great responses that bear no resemblance to how they would actually behave. If you think about the things that you're not good at professionally, you probably know how to do it better. You could tell a story of the way you should do it, but you don't do it because there's an emotional or a motivational or some other psychological thing that keeps you from doing it.
So true.
If you want to ask, how would you handle a conflict with a peer? You'll probably get a pretty good answer from a conflict avoidant person. So stay away from that. Let's learn about their past. Facts, objective information lives in the past. So we want to focus candidates on learning about where they've been, what they've done, the successes and failures, the hits and misses in their past. I would say on top of that, instead of it being an input-output where I ask a question and I wait for a candidate to give me a perfectly packaged 5-minute little present, it needs to be a dialogue. It should be interactive. I want to be engaged as an interviewer, use that rapport, use that fascination to get in there and dig into the parts of the story that are most relevant for the role that I'm looking to hire them for. So we've spent a lot of time in our trainings helping people really build skill around, where do I take this story? What are the nuggets to get that are really going to help me make a great decision? And when is it time to move on?
I love that. I find that sometimes in the moment, it can be challenging for people to kind of go, okay, the person said X, how should I follow up and dive into that? So one of my like easy takeaways that I use sometimes is tell me a bit more about that, right? Like tell me a bit more about that. That shows you're intrigued, you want to learn more, and yet you're not having to like really think too hard about like customizing it in a way where it's like about what they just said. It's like you just want to know more, and then maybe from that you can then dive in and do follow-up questions that are related to the story.
It's funny that you should say that. So when you throw out something, tell me more about that. That is the ultimate, like, I don't know what to ask next. We tell people that's the place to go. Keep the dialogue flowing. Tell me more about that.
Good. I was afraid you were going to say, don't do that again.
No.
So.
Sometimes you want to be more prescriptive. And anytime you're like, I really want to be able to know whether 30% growth was a big deal or not, or I really want to know the way that they delivered that innovation, what the inspiration was for that innovation that leapfrog competitors. Well, hey, you understand what you want to unpack. In that case, I wouldn't go with the tell me more about that. I might say, what was the source of that innovation? Or tell me about that 30%. How did that 30% compare to the market or compare to your competitors? But if I'm stuck, tell me more about that. Fabulous place to go.
Yeah, I love that. But those are also great, like easy things to remember, different scenarios. Those kind of ask the questions can actually work in different scenarios. So those are great tidbits. So tell me, I've sat on a couple calls where I have that intuition. I call them pink flags. They're not red. I'm not going to kick the can out, but there's just something not quite, I don't know, just doesn't add up, or I'm not getting the detail I'm looking for. And even though I keep trying to pry, it's just not happening. Is that just like a flag of like, this person is just trying to use all the buzzwords and don't know what they don't know? Or is this more of like, hey, our skills are not right. We got to dive in and educate and train our own skill capability to then be able to get those pink flags to really show their true colors?
Sure. There's a lot in your question.
There is.
It's a great question. Let me just hit a couple of points on this.
Yeah.
We tell the founders and hiring managers we work with to go into interviews from a place of non-judgment. And what I mean by that is we don't want to kick off the interview with this little doppelganger on our shoulder who's going to be listening to every response and deciding, is this the great? Oh, they're terrible. Oh, wait, I love them again. Oh, if we're in that mindset of judgment, what ends up happening is, first of all, the candidate can feel it. They start holding their cards closer. They won't share that next story. We're not creating that free flow of information because our judgment is very apparent. If our mind is switched into judgment mode, candidates start to clam up. Also, when we start thinking pink flag, green flag, yellow flag, when we start doing that, it shapes the questions that we ask. We start chasing hypotheses. I have hypothesis that this person's kind of lazy. I'm going to go about pursuing this hypothesis by virtue of the questions that I ask next. So you start to taint or corrupt the data that you get by the nature of the questions that you're asking next. So is there any place? So if you have this intuition, you're talking to a candidate, and let's say that there's a very clear behavior here. You mentioned a lack of detail. We're talking about a role they held 3 years ago, not 10 years ago, 3 years ago. And we're asking information about we're not asking overly complex questions. Right. We're not saying, tell me about a time when you had a whole lot of stakeholders and a tight deadline, and you were working on a cross-functional project, and it involved multiple geographies, and they're sitting there going, oh my, I don't even know how to come up with an answer for this. Right. When have I done all of these 5 things? If they can't come up with a detailed story, that's on you.
Yeah.
Right. But if you said, what was the biggest impact you had on that company in your 3 years there? And there's a lack of detail and there's a lack of rigor or substance in their response, I would note it. I would just have in your notes, I will hit caps lock and I'll put struggling to get details. And I'm going to go back into non-judgment mode. I can look at my notes later and remind myself, this person was struggling to give details on some pretty simple questions, but just be careful about allowing that to change the interview. Don't use the interview itself as the time for judgment. There's always time to judge when you look at your notes at the end of it.
That is such good feedback because, like, we all kind of get into that mode, I think. And especially when maybe there's a thought of like, I have to make a decision by the end of this interview. I have some concerns. I need to dive into those concerns now in order to make the decision at the end of the interview. And I think that's where a lot of us maybe get trapped in the interview process and do exactly what you said. Ultimately, we then taint the interview with
That's
our
right.
biases and our judgment coming into play.
And my first recommendation to whoever that person was would be, don't make a decision at the end of the interview. It would be, give yourself 5 hours, 12 hours. When we do exec assessments, we tell our clients, please don't reach out to us and ask us whether we're a thumbs up or thumbs down in the first 24 hours. We have notes to process. When we force ourselves to make decisions right at the end, we're human beings. We're going to base that upon this glow of feelings that we have coming out of the interview as opposed to the objective data we just collected. So our mantra on this one, an interview is not a performance. It's a data gathering exercise. Use this precious time to get as much data as you can. Don't worry about the judgment. Just get the data. Once the data is in, look at the objective facts that you wrote down and make the decision based upon that. That's how it's one of the most powerful ways to mitigate unconscious bias, is to not ask yourself to make this instinctive, emotion-driven decision at the very end of the interview.
I love that because, we also have our good days and our not so good, our really bad days, right? And so if you have an interview scheduled on maybe a not so good bad day, and you're like, oh, I don't want the candidate to have a bad experience because I don't want them to be rescheduled, or maybe you already rescheduled them once and you're like, I can't do it again, so I'm going to hold it. That is like really good feedback, because let yourself have a moment to think about it, sleep on it, wake up in a better mood, or have a better day to evaluate your data points to make that decision.
There's some very tactical things that we recommend, like don't do an interview if you have 3 back-to-back meetings beforehand and you're going to jump straight into it. These are the
You're not
most
prepared.
important decisions you make as a leader. This decision, getting this critical hire wrong, is going to cost you hundreds of hours next year. You're going to be doing this person's job for them because you hired the wrong person. So the fact
While
that you're
you're
trying
trying
to
to look for a
stuff,
backfill.
so rather than try to stuff this person into your packed Thursday, carve off some time Friday morning and tell your team, no meetings that morning. I have the most important meeting I could possibly have, which is called an interview with a candidate who, and understand this is my primary job as a leader, is surrounding myself with great talent.
Absolutely. So speaking of that, I definitely believe in and heard, hire people who are smarter than you. What do you find in regards to hiring managers when they're making a determination to hire people? Do they follow that? Do they have other mantras? What do you see hiring managers struggling with in that decision-making process?
Oh yeah. What's interesting is, so I referenced these C-level exec interviews. When we do the assessing, we're talking to people who are very far into their careers and they've achieved the highest level positions, right? So these are by nature already high performing individuals. And then we can subcut that by the ones who are the best CEOs of those. What we notice is a very clear pattern. Those individuals who make it to the top and who perform well at the top tend to be people who see a critical part of their job is surrounding themselves with people who are better than they are, who are smarter in areas like, they're like, I would happily take someone who exceeds my abilities in this, that, or the other domain.
Yeah.
Because it's not about ego. It's like they've hit a point where they realize, if I'm the person who can assemble a team that's that good and lead them effectively and empower them, and I'm not threatened by them, the results that I deliver as the boss will speak for themselves, and my next job will take care of itself. They're not worried about being outshined. They realize that the people they've surrounded themselves with are the ones that lift them up. I would say there's just a general, in these highest performing leaders, there's a selflessness that comes through their stories where they are constantly shining a light on the awesome people. And there's a footnote the whole time. You found this person. You led this person. You developed this person.
Empowered. I
You
love that you
empowered
use
this
the word
person.
empowered. Yeah. I
Yes.
mean, it's such a critical role of any manager, but especially higher as you go up in the chain of higher command.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I feel like we could probably talk a lot about recruiting, probably just on the surface of what you are dealing with every day. But are there any other like tips or tricks or tools that you'd like to share with the audience?
Um, there's a couple of things I would say, and I would say the easiest takeaways, if you just want to get a whole lot better, if you want to make significantly better hiring decisions tomorrow, focus on this rapport thing hugely. Really. And everyone's like, oh, really? Rapport? The connection you build with people, the enthusiasm you show to hear their stories is attractive to the highest performers. It enables you to get that next incremental story that you wouldn't have otherwise gotten that makes all the difference on the decision. But even if you are curious and fascinated by the person and you show up like a statue, whether it's Zoom or in person, and you're like, my inner person is very fascinated and curious, but you're not letting it out. You're not showing your enthusiasm. We don't want to be weird. We don't want to be just like jumping around and freaking out over everything they say. But I think just let a little bit of your warmth and humanity come out. That's the thing that's going to enable you to hire the person over a bigger salary, a better brand. They're going to be like, you know what? I just connected with this person better.
Mm-hmm.
And also, again, this is the thing that enables people to really open up and feel comfortable sharing the truth of themselves, the good stuff as well as the bad. So I would say the most important tactic I would do is before you go into your next interview, get curious. And when you're in that interview, find a way to let a little bit of that curiosity leak out. Let this person feel excited and heard.
Yeah.
You can make up, like you can ask some dumb questions. You can make some mistakes on what follow-ups. You can not know where you're going in every story. Great rapport covers up for a lot of skill gaps.
Well, it shows you're human too, the human side of you.
For
And
sure.
I think, as a founder who's just starting to do the interviewing process and may not have other managers under them yet, or even have one layer of management under them, the CEO or the founder, I should say, of a startup business, it's all about culture and it's all about who they are as a human being. That is why people join your business. They are being sold by who you are, your story, your vision. And if you don't bring that to your interview process so that they can get to know you, then you're going to not be able to hire the right people and have lots of turnover.
It's really funny. And there's actually a lot of research behind this. If you're going to go decide which bag of pretzels to buy at the grocery, you're probably going to make a very objective decision on a number of criteria. When you're deciding what company to join, or frankly, what what life partner you're going to choose, these decisions are remarkably emotional. And they really do come down to factors that involve the connections that we feel. In a small kind of higher risk startup situation, it's amplified many times. Like somebody might take a job with a hiring manager they weren't perfectly set on in a big brand name company where they know they have lots of opportunities, they might move around. If you're a founder, it's about you. It is about the connection they feel with you. And if you blow it on that, you're not going to get the good. Your person could be absolutely great from all the skill and knowledge and background. Like they could be perfect for the role, but you're never going to get them if there isn't that human connection.
Yeah, 100%. Especially when you add in the factors of maybe your benefits aren't going to be able to compete against the Googles of the world, right?
Right.
Your salary is not going to be able to compete. Maybe you have equity that you could give better, but again, there's a lot of risk involved. So
But the value of that equity that's a function of how good they think you are.
You are, because you're the one selling the business. Can you get funding? Can you get clients? Can you get more investors? Like these are all things that are all 100% driven by the founder.
Yeah.
So let that person show, let that interviewee be seen. I can't even say that right. Let me write that. Let that interviewee know who you are so that
Absolutely.
they can make the right decision to join you and help you make your company be successful.
You may have listeners on here who are like, hey, I'm magnetic. I raised this round of funding. I've gotten these customers to, I'm good at this thing. I would say take a beat, because when you're in these interview situations, especially when you're working 70, 80 plus hour weeks, you're not even going to know some of the missteps that are in there. You're not even going to realize how you're coming across. A big part of our training, we do mock interviewing with founders, where we will play the part of a candidate and have them interview us. And in a very loving way, we provide feedback on, by the way, the entire this interview, your face has been really scrunched up in a way that makes me feel judged, or you haven't made eye contact. You look like you might be on a two screen setup, and you're looking over here, and I want the eye contact.
Yeah.
So there might be little things that you don't even know that you're doing. And a big part of the work that we do at Talgo is just helping people build some self-awareness on that.
That's great. Jordan, it was such a pleasure to speak with you, but I want to ask one more question as we wrap up. You mentioned you have an amazing founder program or training program. I'd love to hear a little bit more, just so that those listening know some of the cool things that you offer.
Sure. Well, we have done live programs on behalf of big investors like venture capital funds and later stage startups that have a lot of resources. And I think our entrepreneurial roots, we wanted a way to address the needs and to reach out to and work directly with founders who don't have as many resources. So we created a program called Talgo On Demand. So our website's Talgo, TALGO.io/TOD, or you can just navigate to Talgo On Demand. And there's a program really for founders that's accessible, that's about giving you a whole set of tools from all these things around role definition, around sourcing through your networks, around interviewing, around referencing, around making decisions, that helps you get awesome, like build sustainable competitive advantage in hiring throughout the course of your company. I would love to work. And there's a component of this, by the way, that is live work with myself and my co-founder, Matt, where we would actually be coaching you. So yeah, I would encourage anyone who is looking on a budget to make this happen, reach out to us at talgo.io.
I even think some of the things that you have in that training are probably really beneficial to people, recruiters and hiring managers that are not founders, too, right?
For sure. And so there's the founder package, there's the manager package, which is more targeted.
But wait, there's more if you stay on the call. No, I'm just kidding. We will wrap up. This isn't a sales call, but I wanted people to know about this amazing program that you guys have, because I do believe that this is one of the trickiest aspects of people and scaling your company from a people perspective. And getting it right the first time is going to save you so much money, time, and heartache, stress, pressure, like that comes from you didn't hire right. Now you waste, and you go into this like negative, like I wasted all this money, I wasted all this time, and I got to do it all over again, and I don't have the time to do it. Like, just avoid all of that. Avoid that trap and figure out how to hire right. And reach out to Jordan. I definitely would recommend that.
Yeah, well, I will say, having spoken to hundreds of senior executives about their entire career stories, the biggest mistakes, the biggest regrets are the bad hiring decisions. And the sooner you can build that skill, like the more power it'll have.
Absolutely. Well, Jordan, it was a pleasure speaking with you today. And I hope the listeners have several tidbits to take away and can implement right away if they like. And thank you so much for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you on the next podcast. Have a great
Thanks so much for having me,
wherever you are in the world.
All right. Great to be here. Thanks so much.